Yennefer Pola had 3 hours before the council's trackers reached White Barrel Forest, and the wolf pup drowning in the frozen creek wasn't part of the plan. She'd been moving through the pines for the better part of an hour, counting breaths to keep panic locked behind her ribs. 3 weeks since the rejection ceremony. 2 weeks since Lord Mirov's hunters picked up her trail. 1 day since she'd stumbled on this forgotten stretch of wilderness where the maps ran out and mercy was a luxury she couldn't afford. Snow drove sideways across the valley, thick and mean, erasing her tracks as fast as she made them. Good, the storm would buy her time. She needed kindling, water, anything to keep the abandoned trapper's cabin she'd found from becoming a tomb. Then the sound cut through, thin as a thread pulled through wind. Not the creak of ice-heavy branches or the hiss of snow on frozen water. A whimper. Yennefer stopped at the creek's edge, breath fogging white. 20 feet out, a broken log had snagged against boulders, creating a small island in the churning current. Atop it, a dark shape trembled. Wolf pup, silver gray. No bigger than a loaf of bread, its wet fur plastered flat against tiny ribs. As she watched, the pup tried to stand. Its paws slipped on slick bark. It tumbled, nearly falling into the current before catching itself with a desperate scramble. Another weak cry echoed across the water. Logic was clear. Turn away. Return to shelter. She had barely enough food for herself. Winter would be merciless enough without another mouth to feed. The wolves of this forest were not her concern. Yet she remained frozen, watching as those amber eyes met hers across the rushing water. The log shifted slightly in the current. It wouldn't stay trapped forever. Idiot, Yennefer muttered, already unlacing her boots. She set them carefully on the bank beside her waterskin. The burnt umber cloak came next, folded hastily to keep it dry. Her father would have called this exactly the kind of reckless sentiment that got her branded in the first place. The council had said her omega nature made her weak, unfit, disposable. Lord Mirov had agreed to take her anyway, for the treaty, for the land rights. For whatever political game nobles played with lives that weren't their own, she'd run instead. The shock of cold water against her skin forced the air from her lungs. The creek, fed by mountain snowmelt, numbed her feet instantly, then her calves as she waded deeper. Her skirt billowed around her, suddenly heavy, fighting every step. Stay, she called to the pup as though it might understand. Don't move. The stones beneath her feet grew treacherous, slippery with algae and ice. The current strengthened as she pushed forward, pulling at her like hungry hands. Halfway now, the water reached her waist, stealing warmth, making her gasp with each step. One wrong move and she'd join the pup in its predicament. Or worse, the log shifted again. The pup whimpered louder, scrabbling with needle-clawed paws. Almost there, Yennefer gasped, each breath sharp and thin in her chest. 3 more steps. 2. Her fingers grazed rough bark, then closed around the log's edge. The pup cowered, showing tiny teeth. I won't hurt you, she whispered. Let me help. Something in her voice, or perhaps simple desperation, made the creature still as she reached out. Its body was shockingly light as she lifted it, barely more than a bundle of wet fur and trembling limbs. She cradled it against her chest. The rapid heartbeat pulsed against her own like a second heart. The return journey felt twice as long. The current seemed stronger now. Aware of what she carried, her legs ached with cold. When her foot finally touched the muddy shore, relief flooded through her, quickly followed by the realization that the storm now fell in earnest. Yennefer gathered her belongings with one arm, keeping the pup secure against her body with the other. Blood smeared her skin where its paw had been cut on something sharp. You're safe, she murmured, wrapping her cloak around them both. I have a fire waiting. Food. Not much, but enough to share. The pup nestled closer, seeking her warmth. For the first time in weeks, the weight of another living creature against her heart made the isolation feel less absolute. She stumbled through the trees, following the path she'd memorized that morning. The cabin appeared through the white curtain of snow, a dark shape hunched against the hillside, forgotten, abandoned, hers by right of desperation. Inside, dust covered everything. Claw marks scored the walls where some animal had denned here seasons ago. The hearth sat half collapsed, but she'd spent yesterday stacking stones, making it functional. It would hold. Yennefer laid the pup on the cleanest patch of floor and set about building a fire. Her hands shook, whether from cold or adrenaline she couldn't say. The kindling caught. Flames licked upward, casting orange light across rough-hewn walls. She wrapped the pup in her spare shirt, the only soft thing she owned. It curled into the fabric, shivering but alive. "You're safe now," she whispered again, this time meaning it. The pup's amber eyes watched her as she moved about the small space, securing the door, checking the window, laying out her meager supplies: dried meat, a handful of nuts, 2 apples going soft. Water in a dented canteen. Not enough. But it would have to be. Outside, the storm howled. Inside, the fire crackled. For one perfect moment, Yennefer allowed herself to breathe. Then the forest stopped. The constant background murmur, wind in branches, snow against bark, the faint rush of the distant creek, cut off as if someone had closed a door. An unnatural silence pressed against the cabin walls, heavy as stone. The pup lifted its head, ears swiveled forward. The shivering stopped, replaced by rigid stillness. Yennefer's heart kicked against her ribs. "What is it?" Outside, something moved. Not the random shift of wind-blown branches. Deliberate, purposeful, footsteps. Too heavy for wolves, too soft for men. The pup whined, low and trembling. Not fear, recognition. Yennefer reached for the iron poker by the hearth, the only weapon she had. Her breath came shallow now, pulse loud in her ears. Through the warped glass of the single window, shadows moved against snow. One shadow, then another, then more. A shape passed directly before the window, tall, broad-shouldered, moving on 2 legs but wrong somehow, the gait too fluid, too silent. The firelight flickered. The pup pressed itself against her leg. The shadow stopped. Through the glass, Yennefer saw the shape turn. Face the cabin, stand utterly still, watching. Then it moved on, footsteps fading into the storm's white noise, but the silence remained. The forest held its breath. And Yennefer understood with cold certainty that her simple act of mercy had been witnessed by something that should not exist. But to understand why a wolf would matter, why that moment would reshape everything she thought she knew about predators and packs and power, we need to go back 3 weeks, to the night Yennefer Pola stopped being someone's daughter and became prey. Dawn crept through the cabin window, gray and grudging. Yennefer woke to warmth that made no sense. The hearth blazed with fresh logs stacked in a careful pyramid she absolutely had not built. Her breath caught. The door was still barred from the inside. Her knife sat exactly where she had left it on the floor beside her makeshift bed. The pup slept curled in her spare shirt, ribs rising and falling with each soft breath. But the fire burned hot and strong, as though someone had tended it through the night. Yennefer sat up slowly, every muscle stiff from cold and exhaustion. Her eyes tracked the room. Nothing else had been disturbed, no footprints in the dust, no signs of entry. Then she saw it. Hanging from a nail beside the door, a nail she was certain had been empty last night, was a strip of fresh meat, dark red, still bleeding slightly. Venison, by the look of it. Her pulse hammered in her throat. She rose on unsteady legs, poker gripped tight, and approached the door. Through the warped glass of the window, morning light revealed what the darkness had hidden. Wolves. A ring of them, perhaps a dozen, sat in perfect formation around her cabin, not prowling, not hunting, watching. Their discipline was unnatural, almost military. Each wolf faced outward as though guarding the cabin rather than threatening it. At the center of the formation sat one massive black wolf, shoulders high as her waist, fur so dark it seemed to absorb light. Its eyes, even from this distance, gleamed amber gold. As Yennefer watched, the black wolf rose. The others remained seated, motionless as statues. The alpha approached the cabin threshold with slow, measured steps. In its jaws hung the carcass of a fresh deer, throat torn clean. It laid the deer across the snow directly in front of her door, then stepped back and bowed. Head lowered, front legs bent, the gesture unmistakable. A gesture of deference, of offering. Yennefer's grip on the poker went slack. Wolves did not bow. Wolves did not bring tribute. Wolves did not guard human shelters or tend fires through the night. the black wolf straightened. For a long moment, it stood utterly still, eyes fixed on the cabin door. On her. Then it began to change. The sound came first, a wet sliding noise like leather pulled over stone. Bones shifted beneath fur, realigning with audible pops and cracks. The wolf's spine elongated, hind legs straightening, front legs lengthening into arms. Yennefer stumbled backward, hand flying to her mouth. Fur receded like water flowing upward, revealing skin, muscle reformed, human anatomy emerging from animal structure. The transformation was neither slow nor fast. It simply was, inevitable as dawn, as though the wolf shape had been temporary, and this was what lay beneath all along. Within moments, a man stood where the wolf had been, bare-chested despite the snow, broad-shouldered, lean-muscled, covered in scars that told stories of survival she could only guess at. His hair fell to his shoulders, black as the fur had been, tangled and wild, and his eyes, they remained exactly the same, amber gold, gleaming with intelligence that seemed both human and other. He wore only rough leather pants, feet bare against the frozen ground. He should have been shivering. He stood as though cold was a concept that did not apply to him. The man tilted his head, studying the cabin. Then he lifted his face and sniffed the air, nostrils flaring, reading scents the way other men read books. His gaze found the window. Found her. Yennefer froze. Their eyes locked through the glass. She waited for him to speak, to explain, to demand entry. Instead, he placed one hand flat against his chest and bowed. The exact same gesture the wolf had made. Slow, deliberate, respectful. Then he turned and walked back toward the tree line. Not with the careful steps of a man navigating snow, but with the fluid certainty of something that knew this forest as home. The pack rose as one, falling into formation around him. Within moments, they had melted into the pines, leaving only tracks and the deer carcass as proof they had existed at all. Yennefer sank to the floor, poker clattering beside her. Her hands trembled. Her mind raced through explanations, and found none that made sense. Shifters existed in old stories, in legends grandmothers told to frighten children, not in waking reality, not in abandoned forests where winter killed the unprepared. Yet she had seen it. Bone and fur and transformation, man and wolf occupying the same space, the same flesh. The pup whined from its nest of fabric. She looked over to find it watching her with those same amber eyes. Recognition flooded through her. This was one of them, one of his. "What are you?" she whispered. The pup only yawned and settled back to sleep. That night, exhaustion pulled Yennefer under despite her racing thoughts. She dreamed of footsteps circling the cabin, patient and endless. In her dream, she stood at the window and watched the man pacing the perimeter, never stopping, never resting. The pack moved with him, a living barrier between her shelter and the darkness beyond. Protecting, guarding. She woke to pale morning light and silence. The fire had been tended again. More meat hung by the door, this time rabbit. The deer carcass from yesterday was gone, butchered and stored she knew not where. Yennefer pulled her cloak tight and opened the door. The snow outside told the story her waking mind had tried to deny. Paw prints circled the cabin in an unbroken ring, layered over each other from hours of patrol. But woven among them were others. Human footprints, bare feet in snow. The two trails intersected, overlapped, continued as one. He had walked as man and wolf throughout the night, changed and changed back, never leaving, never sleeping, keeping watch. Yennefer knelt and placed her palm over one human print. It was massive, easily twice the size of her own hand. The cold had frozen it perfect in the snow. She looked toward the tree line where the pack had vanished. Nothing moved in the gray morning light, but she felt eyes on her, watching, waiting. Her fear had burned away like morning fog. What remained was something else entirely. Curiosity, wonder, fascination. "Who are you?" she asked the empty forest. Only wind answered, but somehow Yennefer knew he heard. He returned 3 days later. Yennefer was splitting kindling behind the cabin when the pup suddenly bolted, limping but determined, toward the tree line. She straightened, axe lowering, and watched as the black-haired man emerged from the pines. He walked upright this time, no shift between forms, but his gait carried that same fluid certainty. The pup reached him and circled his legs, yipping with joy. He knelt and ran one hand over its head with surprising gentleness. Then he stood and met her eyes. Blood streaked his left side, dark and fresh against his skin. A gash ran from ribs to hip, deep enough that she could see muscle beneath. He swayed slightly but remained standing. Yennefer dropped the axe and moved toward him without thinking. "You're hurt." He tilted his head at her voice, processing the sounds. Then he lifted one hand and pointed at the wound, pointed at himself, back to the wound. A gesture that said, yes, injured, aware, not asking for help but not refusing it either. "Inside," Yennefer said, gesturing toward the cabin. "Come." He followed, the pup trotting between them like a tiny escort. Inside, she guided him to sit by the hearth. He lowered himself with controlled care, never showing pain though his jaw tightened. Up close, the scars covering his torso told stories of a brutal life. Claw marks, bite patterns, burns. He had survived things that should have killed him. Yennefer gathered her medical supplies, meager as they were. Clean water, strips of cloth, the last of her thread. As she worked, cleaning the wound, he watched her face with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable but somehow was not. "Yennefer," she said, touching her chest. "My name, Yennefer." His brow furrowed. He studied her mouth as she spoke. Then, slowly, he repeated the sounds. "Yen, ni, fer." The pronunciation was careful, almost reverent, as though her name was something precious he was learning to hold without breaking. She smiled despite everything. "Yes, good." Over the following days they built a language between them. Not words, not really, but something older. He would point, and she would name. Fire, water, snow, meat. He absorbed each one, repeating until the sounds matched hers. But more often, he communicated the way wolves did. Touch, scent, posture. When he wanted her attention, he would huff softly. When approving, a slow blink. When warning of danger, his body would go rigid, every muscle tensed. She learned to read him the way she was learning to read the forest. They worked together with an ease that surprised her. When wind tore a section of the roof free, he climbed up without hesitation, watching how she secured the branches, then mimicking her movements. When she skinned the deer he had brought, he knelt beside her and showed her a faster technique using different angles of the blade. Laughter crept in between the survival. The first time happened when Yennefer left her cloak hanging by the door. She returned from gathering water to find him wearing it, the burnt umber fabric draped backward over his shoulders, the hood hanging down his back instead of framing his face. He stood there, clearly pleased with himself, waiting for her reaction. She tried to hold the laughter back and failed. It burst out of her, bright and startled, the first real laugh since she had fled the council. His face transformed, confusion shifting to something like wonder, as though her joy was a puzzle he desperately wanted to understand. He wore the cloak wrong for the rest of the day, refusing to take it off, and she let him. They carved marks on the doorframe to count the days, one for each sunrise. His marks were deeper than hers, gouged with a hunting knife he produced from somewhere. Sometimes their hands would brush as they worked, and he would go still, scenting the air near her wrist as though memorizing her. 10 days passed, then 12. On the 13th morning, everything changed. Yennefer was boiling water for tea when he suddenly stiffened. The pup, now stronger and bolder, let out a low growl. Afterhan, the name she had heard him called by the other wolves in her dreams, rose to his feet in one fluid motion. His nostrils flared. His eyes, usually warm amber, went cold and predatory. "What is it?" she whispered. He moved to the window, looked out, then turned back to her, his finger jabbed toward the forest. Then he touched his nose, sniffed. His face twisted into something between rage and recognition. Hunters. Yennefer's blood went cold. She moved to the window beside him. At first, she saw nothing. Then movement, small and deliberate, between the trees. 4 men, maybe 5. They moved in formation, spreading out to surround the cabin. She caught the glint of metal, swords, and on the lead hunter's cloak, even at this distance, she recognized the insignia. Black thread forming the council's seal, the same mark that had been on the branding iron they pressed to her wrist. Afterhan saw it too. A sound built in his chest, low and guttural. Not human. Not quite wolf. Something between. "They're here for me," Yennefer breathed. "Mirov sent them." He looked at her. Something passed between them in that moment. Understanding. Decision. He turned toward the door. "Wait!" She grabbed his arm. "There are too many." He covered her hand with his, squeezed once, then gently removed it. His meaning was clear. Stay here. Stay safe. Then he was gone, shifting as he crossed the threshold. Man to wolf in 3 strides, black fur rippling into existence as bones reformed. The transformation was faster this time, urgent, and he hit the snow running. Yennefer watched through the window, heart hammering. The hunters saw him coming and formed up, blades raised. Afterhand did not slow. He hit their line like a storm, scattering them, jaws snapping, claws tearing. 2 men went down immediately. A third retreated, shouting orders. The remaining hunters pressed in, trying to corner him. That was when Yennefer saw the blade. Different from the others. The steel gleamed with an oily greenish sheen. Wolfsbane. She knew the poison from her herb studies, lethal to shifters, agonizing even in small doses. "No," she whispered. The hunter with the poisoned blade was good, patient. He waited until Afterhand was engaged with another attacker, then lunged. The blade caught Afterhand along the ribs, a long slicing cut that drew blood black as pitch. Afterhand yelped, a sound of genuine pain, and wheeled away. The hunters pressed their advantage, driving him back toward the cabin. He fought as he retreated, protecting the threshold, protecting her, but the poison was already working. She could see it in the way his movements slowed, grew less precise. The lead hunter raised his blade for a killing blow. Afterhand surged forward one last time, jaws closing around the man's sword arm. Bone crunched. The hunter screamed. His companions grabbed him and retreated, dragging their wounded, leaving 2 dead in the snow. Silence fell. Afterhand stood in the clearing, sides heaving, blood dripping from the gash in his ribs. Black blood. Wrong blood. He swayed, took 1 step toward the cabin, then collapsed. Yennefer ran. She dragged him inside by sheer will and terror. He was too heavy, dead weight, but she pulled anyway, fingers locked in his fur, refusing to let go. The pup darted around them, whining frantically. Once across the threshold, she barred the door and turned to face the problem. Afterhand shifted back to human form, the change involuntary as consciousness slipped. The wound looked worse on human skin. The cut itself was not fatal, but the edges had already begun to darken, veins radiating outward in branching lines of green-black. Wolfsbane poisoning. "No," Yennefer said aloud, as though denial could rewrite reality. "No, you do not get to die." She had seen men die of wolfsbane. It was not quick. It was not kind. The poison spread through the blood, attacking the heart, the lungs, turning the body against itself until system failure or suffocation ended it. She had perhaps hours, maybe less. Outside, sounds of activity, snarls and digging. Through the window, she glimpsed wolves, more than before, excavating trenches around the cabin. They moved with purpose, creating barriers, defensive positions. The pack was preparing for siege. But first, she had to save their alpha. Yennefer forced herself to think. The cabin had belonged to trappers once. They would have known about wolfsbane, would have needed remedies. Her eyes swept the walls, searching for anything carved or marked. There. On the support beam above the hearth, scratched letters, crude but legible, instructions passed from trapper to trapper. For wolfbane, bearberry and king's moss, grind fine, mix with snow melt, pack the wound, keep cold. She nearly wept with relief. Bearberry grew near water. King's moss clung to north-facing rocks, both within reach if she was fast, but leaving him now, even for minutes, felt impossible. The pup solved her problem by darting to the door and scratching insistently. When she opened it, the small creature bolted into the storm. Yennefer waited, breath held, until the pup returned minutes later with a mouthful of green moss. One of the larger wolves followed, dropping bearberry branches at the threshold before melting back into the snow. They were helping. The pack was helping her save him. Yennefer worked with shaking hands. Grind the moss and berries together. Add snow melt until it formed a paste. The smell was bitter, medicinal. She packed it into the wound, pressing hard to ensure it reached deep. Afterhand's body jerked, his eyes rolled back. The green-black veins spread up his chest, reaching toward his heart. "Stay with me," she commanded, her voice breaking. "Do you hear me? Stay." His breathing grew shallow. Sweat beaded his forehead despite the cold. Tremors racked his frame, violent enough to make the floorboards shake. Yennefer's mind fractured into parallel tracks. One part focused on the present, on mixing more poultice, on pressing cold compresses to his burning skin. The other part spiraled through memory. The council chamber. Her father standing silent while the elders burned the Omega mark into her wrist. The smell of her own flesh cooking. Their pronouncement that she was rejected, unworthy but useful. Lord Mirov's cold smile when they told him she came with land rights and mining access. The bargain made over her body as though she was inventory to be traded. She had been branded so she could be sold. Outside, wolves snarled at shapes moving through the storm. Mirov's hunters had not given up. They circled, probing for weakness, waiting for dawn when they could mount a proper assault. But dawn did not matter if Afterhand died before sunrise. His heartbeat faltered. She felt it under her palm, the rhythm stuttering, missing beats. His lips had gone blue. "No," Yennefer said. "No, I will not allow this." She knew what had to be done. The trapper's notes had been explicit. The poison heated the blood. Cold was the only counter. Extreme cold. Cold enough to slow the heart, slow the poison, buy time for the herbs to work. She grabbed him under the arms and pulled. He was limp, unresponsive. She dragged him inch by agonizing inch toward the door. The wolves parted as she emerged into the storm. She hauled him through snow toward the creek, the same creek where she had saved the pup. The water would be barely above freezing. It might kill him. It would certainly kill him if she did nothing. At the creek's edge, she rolled him into the shallows. The shock made his eyes fly open, unseeing, pupils blown wide. His back arched, every muscle locked rigid. Yennefer waded in beside him, pressed her palm flat against his chest, over his heart. "Don't you dare," she whispered. "Don't you dare leave me here alone." His heart fluttered under her hand. Once, twice, then nothing. She pressed harder, finding the rhythm she needed, forcing compressions. "Breathe," she commanded. "Breathe, you stubborn, impossible, beautiful creature. Breathe." Water swirled around them, black with blood and poison. Snow fell on his upturned face. The forest held its breath. Then, a gasp. Sharp and desperate, dragging air into collapsed lungs. His heart kicked against her palm, stuttering back to life. His eyes, when they opened, blazed gold even in the darkness. He stared up at her, recognition flooding back, and tried to speak. No words came, but his hand found hers where it rested on his chest and held on. "I have you," Yennefer said, tears freezing on her cheeks. "I have you." The wolves began to howl, a sound of triumph and relief that echoed through White Barrel Forest. Inside her chest, something fundamental shifted and locked into place. She had chosen this, chosen him, chosen to fight for something beyond survival. And she would burn the world before she let them take it from her. They made it back to the cabin as dawn broke gray and merciless. Afterhand could walk now, barely, one arm slung over her shoulders. The wolves formed an escort around them, bodies low and ready. Inside, Yennefer wrapped him in every blanket she owned and built the fire high. The green-black veins had stopped spreading, retreating slowly toward the wound site. The herbs were working. He would live, but survival meant nothing if the hunters returned with reinforcements. She was checking the barricades when the wind changed. What had been steady snowfall became a howling blizzard, the kind that turned the world white and erased all sense of direction. Through the fury, shapes moved with purpose. The hunters had come at dawn as she knew they would. Yennefer counted them through the window. 6 men this time, armored and prepared. They spread out in a wide circle, cutting off all escape routes. The lead hunter carried a horn. He raised it to his lips and blew 3 sharp blasts. A signal. They expected her to surrender. Instead, she climbed. The cabin's roof was rough-timbered and steep, but she had spent days repairing it. She knew every handhold, every weak board to avoid. In her belt, she carried the pitch rope she had prepared for exactly this moment. Fabric soaked in pine resin and animal fat. Highly flammable. Highly effective. Below, Afterhan emerged from the cabin. He moved differently now, caught between forms, refusing to fully commit to either. His spine curved wrong for a man, right for a wolf. His hands bore claws. His face remained human, but his teeth had lengthened into fangs. The transformation incomplete, suspended, making him something new, something terrifying. The wolves burst from the tree line like shadows given teeth. They hit the hunter's formation from 3 sides, coordinated and brutal. Men screamed, blades flashed. Blood stained the snow in dark splashes. Yennefer struck flint against steel. The pitch rope caught immediately, flames racing along its length. She waited, counting heartbeats, timing the throw. The hunters had clustered together, trying to create a defensive perimeter against the wolves. Perfect. She dropped the burning rope directly into their center. Fire met snow in an explosion of steam and smoke. Men scattered, breaking formation, blind and choking. The wolves pressed their advantage. One hunter went down, then another. The remaining 4 retreated toward the creek, weapons raised but fear plain in their movements. Afterhan pursued them with methodical violence. He moved like weather, impossible to track, impossible to predict. Half man gave him human intelligence and strategy, half beast gave him speed and savagery. The combination was unstoppable. 3 hunters fell. Only one remained. Captain Vasco, older than the others, gray in his beard, holding his blade with the certainty of someone who had survived too many battles to panic now. He stood his ground as Afterhan circled him, snow swirling between them. "Come on then," Vasco said quietly. "Finish it." Afterhan moved to strike, stopped. His head tilted, nostrils flaring, reading scent and memory. Vasco's sword lowered slightly. His eyes widened as he truly saw what stood before him. Not just a shifter, not just a threat. Something specific, something remembered. "The eyes," Vasco whispered. "Golden eyes. I know those eyes." Yennefer climbed down from the roof, landing hard in the snow. She approached slowly, keeping herself between Afterhan and any potential threat. "What are you talking about?" Vasco did not look at her. His attention remained locked on Afterhan. 15 years ago, a massacre. Council sent us to eliminate a shifter family hiding in these mountains. We killed them all. Man, woman, 2 older children. His voice grew rough. But there was a baby, couldn't have been more than 2 years old. Golden eyes staring up at me from the cradle. My captain ordered me to finish it. I was supposed to cut that child's throat and burn the body with the rest. Afterhan's growl built to a roar. The wolves around them tensed, waiting for the kill command. "But I didn't," Vasco continued. His sword dropped completely now, point sinking into snow. "I carried that baby into the forest, left him in a wolf den I had seen during patrol, told my captain the job was done, told myself the cold would take him quick. Cleaner than a blade." He met Afterhan's eyes directly. "But you lived. Somehow you lived. The wolves raised you. And now you're here. Now I'm here. And I have to ask myself what kind of man I became, following orders that made monsters of us all." Silence fell except for the wind. Even the wolves had gone still. "I can't undo what I did," Vasco said. "I can't bring your family back, but I can do this one thing." He drove his blade into the snow and stepped away from it. "Run, both of you. Get as far from here as you can. Mirov has bought half the council. He wants her back, wants you dead, and he has the resources to make it happen." Yennefer found her voice. "Why should we believe you?" "Because I'm tired," Vasco said simply. "Tired of killing. Tired of following evil men who call themselves lords. The world is not ready for what you are, what you could become together. Maybe it never will be. But that's not your fault. It's ours." He turned and began walking toward the tree line, stopped after a few steps without looking back. "There's a path through the northern ridge, unmarked. It leads to settlements beyond Mirov's reach. Take it before the next storm hits." Then he was gone, swallowed by snow and trees, leaving only his blade standing like a grave marker in the white. Afterhan shifted fully back to human form. The change left him shaking, weakened from poison and exertion. Yennefer caught him before he fell. "We need to go," she said. "Now. Before he changes his mind or others come." Afterhan nodded. Together they stumbled back to the cabin. They took only what they could carry: Food, weapons, the warmest blankets, everything else they left behind. The wolves waited in formation. The pup, grown stronger now, pressed against Yennefer's leg. She reached down and scratched behind its ears, this small creature that had changed everything. "Lead us north," she told the pack. They moved as one into the blizzard. The storm broke on the far side of the ridge. One moment they were struggling through wind and white. The next they crossed an invisible line and emerged into stillness. The sky above showed patches of pale blue. The sun, weak but present, cast long shadows across untouched snow. Safe. For now. For however long now lasted. Yennefer found a clearing sheltered by rock formations. "Here," she said, more tired than she had ever been in her life. "We rest here." Building the fire took the last of her strength. Her hands shook so badly she could barely strike the flint. But eventually sparks caught, flames grew, and warmth pushed back the cold. Afterhand collapsed beside the fire. The wound in his ribs had stopped bleeding but would scar badly. He would carry the mark of that poisoned blade forever. Another story written on his skin. The wolves settled around them in a protective circle. Guard positions came naturally to them. The pup curled between Yennefer and Afterhand, connecting them like a bridge. For a long time neither spoke. There were no words big enough for what had happened, for what they had survived, for what they had become to each other. Then Afterhand moved. Slowly, carefully, he reached across the space between them and touched her wrist. The same wrist that bore the Omega brand. His fingers were gentle, tracing the scar tissue as though reading it like text. He met her eyes. His voice, when it came, held the weight of everything he had learned, everything he was trying to become. "My pack." 2 words. His only clear sentence. Offered like a vow. Yennefer's heart stuttered. She understood what he meant, what he was asking. In wolf culture, pack meant everything. Family, safety, purpose, belonging. He was offering her a place in his world, protection under his strength, a role in the hierarchy he led. But she had spent her whole life being told where she belonged, what role she would play, whose property she would become. The council had branded her father had sold her, Mirov had hunted her. Every man in her life had tried to define her by his needs, his wants, his plans. No more. She looked at him, this impossible man raised by wolves, scarred and fierce and offering her everything he knew how to give, and she loved him for it. Loved him enough to refuse. "No," she said softly, "not yours." Confusion crossed his face. Hurt began to bloom behind those golden eyes. Yennefer took his hand in both of hers. She had seen the trapper's notes, had read about wolf rituals in the margins of old journals. She knew what came next. What had to come next if they were going to build something new. She turned her wrist upward, baring the branded skin to the dawn light. The ancient claim gesture. The movement that said, "I choose you," but on equal terms with equal voice, as partner not possession. "Ours," she said. "Not your pack, our pack. Not your choice. Our choice. Not your life. Our life." Understanding crashed over him like a wave. His expression transformed from confusion to wonder to something that might have been joy if he had the words to name it. He took her offered wrist in his hand, careful not to hurt the scarred skin. Then he lifted it to his forehead, pressing it there in the wolf gesture of acceptance and respect. When he looked up again, his eyes blazed gold in the firelight. "Ours," he repeated. His pronunciation was perfect. Around them, the wolves rose as one. Every head bowed. Not to Afterhand alone as they had done before, to both of them, to the pack leaders, plural. To the choice they had made together. Dawn broke fully over the ridge, spilling gold across the clearing. Light touched everything, transformed everything, made the whole world new. Yennefer felt the shift inside her chest. The place where the Omega brand had tried to define her as less, as broken, as rejected. That place filled with something else now. Not Alpha, not Omega. Something outside their broken hierarchy entirely. Chosen. Claiming. Free. "We should keep moving," she said eventually. "Put more distance between us and Mirov's reach." Afterhand nodded. Together they packed up the camp, scattered the fire, prepared to walk into whatever came next. The wolves fell into formation around them, natural and right. The pup danced ahead, excited by the journey, too young to understand danger but old enough to trust the pack. They walked north, two figures moving through endless white. Behind them, their footprints in the snow, his larger, hers smaller. But as the morning progressed and the walking rhythm synced, the trails grew closer, merged, became indistinguishable, until there was only one trail, one path, one choice written in snow. The rejected Omega who ran from a forced marriage, the man raised by wolves who remembered massacre and survival, the pack that followed not by command but by love. Together they disappeared into the wilderness, leaving behind the world that tried to break them. Ahead lay unknown territory, dangers they could not predict, winters that would test them, but they would face it all together, on their own terms, by their own choice. And that made all the difference.